Elijah Cole had 3 seconds left to live before the machete split his skull open. Then the Apache girl he'd carried out of a burning building 3 years ago stepped out of the twilight and sent an arrow through his executioner's arm. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The Arizona desert stretched endlessly beneath a sky painted in shades of dying amber, the sun bleeding its last light across the horizon as if the heavens themselves knew that death was coming to claim one of its wanderers. The wagon stood abandoned where its wheel had finally surrendered to the unforgiving terrain, tilted at an angle that spoke of journeys interrupted and plans gone desperately wrong. And against that broken wheel, his back pressed to the weathered wood, as if it were the only thing keeping him tethered to the world of the living, sat Elijah Cole, watching his blood soak into the red Arizona earth. He had been a fool to travel alone through Comanche territory, but desperation made fools of even the wisest men. The cattle money he carried in his saddlebag represented 3 years of brutal labor on the ranches outside Tucson, enough to buy a small piece of land where a man could finally stop running and start building. But 3 outlaws had spotted him at the trading post in Copper Springs, had followed him into the wilderness like wolves tracking wounded prey, and now here he was, cut up and bleeding out while the sun set on what might be his final day. The knife wound in his right arm was the worst of it, a deep gash that ran from elbow to wrist where one of the outlaws had caught him during the initial ambush. His revolver lay in the dust a few feet away, its chambers empty after he had managed to take down 2 of the attackers before the third had gotten the better of him. Now that third man, a grizzled killer named Silas Harker, stood somewhere behind the wagon, sharpening his blade and taking his time because he knew there was no rush. Elijah Cole was not going anywhere. The sound of boots crunching on hard-packed earth told Elijah that his executioner was approaching. He tried to push himself upright, to face death like a man, but his body had lost too much blood, and his vision swam with dark spots that pulsed in rhythm with his weakening heartbeat. His black hat lay in the dust beside his empty gun, artifacts of a life that was rapidly slipping away like water through his fingers. Silas Harker appeared around the side of the wagon, his weathered face twisted into an expression of cruel satisfaction. The machete in his raised hand caught the dying sunlight, its blade already stained with Elijah's blood from their earlier struggle. The outlaw's eyes held no mercy, no hesitation, only the cold calculation of a man who had killed before and would kill again without losing a moment's sleep. "Should have just handed over the money when we asked nice," Silas said, his voice carrying the rasp of a lifetime of tobacco and whiskey. "Would have saved yourself a lot of suffering." Elijah met the man's gaze with what remained of his strength. "Money's earned," he managed through gritted teeth, "not given." Silas laughed, a sound as dry as the desert wind. Noble words from a dead man. He raised the machete higher, preparing to bring it down in a killing stroke that would end Elijah Cole's story in blood and dust. But the story was not ready to end. Not yet. The arrow came from nowhere and everywhere at once, a whisper of fletched death that cut through the twilight air with impossible precision. It struck Silas Harker's raised arm just above the wrist, passing clean through flesh and sinew with enough force to send the machete spinning away into the gathering darkness. The outlaw screamed, a sound of pure animal agony that echoed across the empty desert, and staggered backward, clutching at the shaft protruding from his shattered arm. Elijah turned his head, though the motion sent waves of dizziness crashing through his skull, and saw her standing there in the dying light. She was Apache. That much was immediately clear from the traditional garments she wore, the buckskin decorated with beadwork that told stories he could not read. Her dark hair was bound back from a face that held the fierce beauty of the desert itself, all sharp angles and warrior's eyes that burned with an intensity that seemed to make the very air around her crackle with power. In her hand she held a bow drawn taut, another arrow already nocked and aimed at Silas Harker's heart. "Leave," she commanded, and her voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. This was not a request. This was not a negotiation. This was a woman who had made a decision and would see it through regardless of the consequences. Silas Harker was a killer, but he was not a fool. He looked at the arrow in his arm, at the bow in the woman's hands. at his machete lying uselessly in the dust several feet away. The calculation in his eyes shifted from murderous intent to desperate self-preservation. Without another word, he turned and stumbled into the gathering darkness, his boots kicking up clouds of red dust as he fled toward wherever his horse was waiting. The Apache woman did not lower her bow until the sound of hoofbeats had faded completely into the distance. Only then did she turn her attention to the wounded cowboy slumped against the wagon wheel, and something changed in her expression. Recognition flickered across her features like lightning illuminating a storm cloud, and for a moment she simply stood there, staring at him as if he were a ghost risen from the grave. "It's you," she said softly, and there was wonder in her voice. Wonder and something else that Elijah's pain-fogged mind could not quite identify. "The one who walked through fire." Elijah tried to focus on her face, tried to understand why she was looking at him with such intensity, but his vision was growing darker by the moment. "Don't know what you mean," he managed, his words slurring together. "Don't think we've met." "You do not remember," she said, moving toward him with the fluid grace of someone who had spent their life navigating the harsh beauty of this land. "But I remember. I have never forgotten." She knelt beside him, her hands already moving to examine his wounds with the practiced efficiency of someone trained in the healing arts. Her fingers were surprisingly gentle as they probed the edges of the knife wound, assessing the damage with a healer's clinical detachment, even as her eyes held the warm glow of recognition. 3 summers ago, she continued, her voice taking on the cadence of a story passed down through generations. The trading post at Broken Mesa, the fire. And suddenly, through the haze of blood loss and approaching unconsciousness, Elijah remembered. The memory came flooding back like water breaking through a dam, carrying with it the acrid smell of smoke and the desperate screams of people trapped inside a burning building. Broken Mesa had been a small trading post nestled in the foothills where Apache territory met the sprawling cattle lands of the white settlers. It was a place where both worlds intersected uneasily, where commerce created temporary truces between people who otherwise viewed each other with suspicion and fear. Elijah had been passing through on his way to a cattle drive, stopping only to resupply before continuing his journey north. The fire had started in the storage room at the back of that main building, fed by barrels of lamp oil that someone had stacked too close to a faulty chimney. Within minutes, the entire structure was engulfed, flames licking at the wooden walls with hungry tongues that devoured everything they touched. Most of the people inside had managed to escape through the front entrance, but a commotion near the back had drawn Elijah's attention as he helped guide panicked horses away from the spreading inferno. A young Apache girl, no more than 12 or 13 summers, had been trapped when a burning beam collapsed across the rear doorway. Her mother stood outside, screaming in a language Elijah did not understand, her hands reaching uselessly toward the wall of flame that separated her from her child. The other men at the trading post had already written the girl off as dead, were already backing away from the heat that made the very air shimmer and dance. But Elijah Cole had been raised to believe that a man's worth was measured not by what he gained, but by what he was willing to sacrifice. Without thinking, without calculating the odds or considering the consequences, he had wrapped his bandana around his face and plunged through the flames. The heat had been unlike anything he had ever experienced, a living thing that pressed against his skin and tried to force the air from his lungs. He had found the girl huddled in a corner, her eyes wide with terror, her small body pressed against the wall as if she could somehow pass through the wood and escape into the cool night air beyond. He had scooped her up without a word, felt her arms wrap around his neck with desperate strength, and then he had run. The burning beam that blocked the doorway had collapsed further as he approached, showering sparks across his path and igniting the hem of his coat. He had not stopped, had not hesitated, had simply charged through the wall of fire and emerged on the other side with the girl still clutched safely in his arms. His coat had been burning, his hair singed, his skin blistered in a dozen places, but the child was alive. He had placed her gently in her mother's arms and then collapsed to his knees, coughing smoke from his lungs, while strangers poured water over his smoldering clothes. He had left Broken Mesa the next morning, before dawn, not wanting thanks or recognition for what he had done. It was simply what a decent man did when a child's life hung in the balance. He had not looked back, had not thought about the incident again until this moment, lying in the dust with his lifeblood seeping into the Arizona earth. "The girl," he whispered, understanding finally dawning through the fog of his fading consciousness. "You were her mother." The Apache woman shook her head, a sad smile touching her lips. "I was the girl, the child you carried through the fire." She pressed her hands firmly against his wounded arm, and the pressure sent fresh waves of agony radiating through his body. "My name is Ayana. It means eternal blossom. My mother gave me that name because I was born in spring, when the desert flowers despite all reason." "Pretty name," Elijah managed, though speaking was becoming increasingly difficult. "You gave me my life," Ayana continued, working quickly now to bind his wounds with strips of cloth she produced from somewhere within her garments. "For 3 summers I have prayed to find you again, to repay the debt that sits heavy on my spirit. The ancestors have answered my prayers, though not in the way I expected." She worked with practiced efficiency, her hands never hesitating despite the severity of his injuries. Elijah watched her face as his vision narrowed to a tunnel, noticing the faint scars along her arms that spoke of the fire's kiss, permanent reminders of the night their paths had first crossed. She had survived, but not without bearing marks of the ordeal. "You need to rest," she said, tying off the final bandage with a knot that balanced pressure with precision. "You have lost much blood, but you are strong. I will take you to my people. Our medicine woman can heal what I cannot." "Your people," Elijah repeated, the words coming out slurred and distant. "Apache. They won't want a white man in their camp." Ayana's expression hardened with determination. "They will want what I tell them to want. I am the daughter of a chief, and I speak with my father's authority when I am beyond our lands. You saved my life when you had nothing to gain and everything to lose. Now I will save yours, and the debt between us will be balanced." She rose to her feet and disappeared from his field of vision. He heard her moving around the wagon, heard the snort of a horse he had not noticed before, and then she was back, lifting him with a strength that seemed impossible for her lean frame. The world tilted and spun as she maneuvered him onto the horse's back, and he had to grab fistfuls of mane to keep from sliding off. "Hold on," she commanded, swinging up behind him with fluid grace. Her arms came around him, steadying his swaying body as she took the reins. "It is a long ride to the canyon where my people make their summer camp. You must not die before we arrive." "I'll do my best," Elijah mumbled, and then the darkness he had been fighting finally claimed him, pulling him down into unconsciousness as the horse began to move across the desert beneath the emerging stars. Elijah drifted through fever dreams that blurred the boundaries between memory and imagination, between the world of the living and whatever lay beyond. He saw his mother's face, weathered by years of frontier hardship, but still beautiful in the way that only a child can see their mother's beauty. She was standing at the door of the cabin where he had grown up, somewhere in the hill country of Texas, wiping flour from her hands on a faded apron and calling him in for supper. He tried to walk toward her, but the ground beneath his feet kept shifting, turning to sand that swallowed his boots with every step. Then the dream changed, and he was back in Broken Mesa, surrounded by walls of flame that roared like living beasts. The Apache girl was there, but she was not a child anymore. She was Ayana, the woman who had appeared from the twilight to save his life, and she was reaching for him through the fire, her eyes reflecting the dancing flames like twin pools of liquid gold. He tried to reach back, but his arms would not obey his commands, and the fire grew hotter, closer, until it consumed everything. He woke briefly to the sensation of movement, the rhythmic swaying of a horse beneath him and the warmth of another body pressed against his back, keeping him upright in the saddle. Stars wheeled overhead in patterns he did not recognize, and he realized that they must have been traveling for hours. His arm throbbed with a dull, persistent pain that seemed to pulse in rhythm with his heartbeat, and his throat burned with a thirst that felt like he had swallowed the desert itself. "Water," he croaked, the word barely recognizable even into his own ears. "Soon," Ayana's voice came from behind him, calm and steady as the stars above. We are almost there. Save your strength." He wanted to argue, wanted to insist that he needed water now or he would surely die. But the darkness rose up again before he could form the words, pulling him back down into the realm of fever dreams, where time had no meaning and the boundaries of reality dissolved like morning mist. The next time consciousness returned, he was no longer on horseback. He lay on something soft, animal furs perhaps, in a space that smelled of sage and wood smoke and something else, something herbal and medicinal that he could not identify. Firelight flickered against walls that curved upward to a point, and he realized he was inside a dwelling of some kind. A wiki-up, his fever-addled mind supplied, remembering stories he had heard from scouts who had spent time among the Apache people. Faces moved in and out of his field of vision, faces with skin the color of desert clay, and eyes that regarded him with expressions ranging from curiosity to suspicion to outright hostility. He heard voices speaking in a language that flowed like water over stones, musical and harsh at the same time, rising and falling in patterns that he could not decipher. He caught fragments of what might have been arguments, heated exchanges between speakers who clearly disagreed about something important. Through it all, one face remained constant. Ayanna sat beside him, her hand resting on his chest, as if monitoring the rhythm of his heart, her eyes fixed on his face with an intensity that made him feel simultaneously comforted and exposed. When others approached, she would speak to them in rapid bursts of Apache, her tone brooking no argument, and they would retreat, their objections silenced if not satisfied. "They don't want me here," Elijah managed during one of his lucid moments. "Some do not," Ayanna admitted. "They see only a white man, an enemy who has taken our lands and killed our people. They do not understand why I have brought you among us." "Then tell them," he said. "Tell them I'll leave as soon as I can ride. I have told them something more important. I have told them that you are a man of honor, a man who walked through fire to save a child who was not of his blood, not of his people. This matters to my father, it matters to our medicine woman, and in time, it will matter to the others as well." A new face appeared above him, ancient and weathered like the bark of an old cottonwood tree, with eyes that seemed to see through flesh and bone to whatever lay beneath. The medicine woman, Elijah realized, feeling a shiver run down his spine despite the fever that still burned within him. She studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable, and then she spoke to Ayanna in a voice that crackled like dry leaves. Ayanna listened, nodded, and then turned back to Elijah. "She says your spirit is strong, but it fights against her medicine. She says you must stop fighting. You must trust, or you will die." "I'm not fighting," Elijah protested weakly. "Not with your body," Ayanna said. "With your heart. You have built walls around yourself, walls that keep out pain, but also keep out healing. She says you carry old wounds that have nothing to do with the knife that cut your arm. She says these wounds must be opened before they can truly heal." The medicine woman's hands moved to his injured arm, unwrapping the bandages Ayanna had applied in the desert. What she revealed made Elijah's stomach lurch despite his weakened state. The wound was angry and inflamed, red streaks radiating outward from the gash like the roots of some poisonous plant burrowing into his flesh. Infection had set in during the long ride to the camp, and now it threatened to claim what Silas Harker's blade had failed to take. "Bad," Elijah said, the word inadequate to describe what he was seeing. "Yes," Ayanna agreed, her voice tight with concern. "But not beyond healing, not yet." The medicine woman produced a pouch from somewhere within her garments and began mixing its contents with water into a small clay bowl. The smell that rose from the mixture was sharp and bitter, making Elijah's eyes water even from several feet away. Whatever she was preparing, he knew it would not be pleasant. "This will hurt," Ayanna warned him. "I figured as much," he replied, bracing himself against the furs beneath him. The medicine woman's treatment was unlike anything Elijah had experienced in his 32 years of hard living on the frontier. She began by cleaning the wound with water that had been boiled with herbs, the liquid hot enough to make him hiss through clenched teeth, but not so hot as to cause burns. Then she applied the paste she had mixed, a thick green substance that seemed to draw the heat from his infected flesh, even as it sent waves of stinging pain radiating up his arm and into his shoulder. But the physical treatment was only part of her work. As she tended to his body, she chanted in a low, rhythmic voice, words that rose and fell like the wind moving through canyon walls. Other members of the tribe gathered at the entrance to the wickiup, their voices joining hers in a harmony that seemed to vibrate in Elijah's bones. He did not understand the words, but he felt their power, felt something shifting within him as the ancient medicine worked its way through his blood. "She is calling to the spirits," Ayanna explained softly, her hand finding his and squeezing gently, "asking them to guide the sickness out of your body and into the earth, where it can do no harm." "Do you believe in that?" Elijah asked, genuinely curious despite his pain. "Spirits and such?" "I believe in what I have seen," she replied. "I have seen my grandmother cure illnesses that the white doctors said were incurable. I have seen my father speak to the wind and receive answers that prove true. Whether you call it spirits or medicine, or simply the wisdom of many generations, it works. That is enough for me." The chanting continued through the night, rising and falling like tides against the shore of his consciousness. At some point, exhaustion claimed him again, but this time his sleep was different. Instead of fever, dreams filled with fire and fear, he drifted through peaceful darkness, aware of nothing except a distant warmth that seemed to pulse in rhythm with his heart. When he woke, sunlight was streaming through the entrance of the wickiup, painting golden patterns on the curved walls. His arm still ached, but the burning intensity of the infection had faded to a manageable throb. He lifted his hand to examine the wound and found it freshly bandaged, the cloth cool and slightly damp with whatever healing poultice the medicine woman had applied. "You survived the night," Ayanna's voice came from somewhere to his left. He turned his head and found her sitting cross-legged on a woven mat, grinding something in a stone mortar with practiced movements. "The medicine woman says the worst has passed. Your body has accepted her treatment." "That's good news," Elijah said, his voice rusty from disuse. He attempted to push himself upright and was surprised when his body actually obeyed, though the effort left him dizzy and breathless. "Slowly," Ayanna cautioned, setting aside her work and moving to his side. "You have been asleep for 2 days. Your body needs time to remember how to be awake." 2 days? The information hit him like a bucket of cold water. "I've been here for 2 days?" 3, counting the night I brought you to our camp. The fever was strong. There were times when the medicine woman was not certain you would survive." She helped him sit up fully, arranging the furs behind him so he could lean back against them. "But you are stubborn. She says stubbornness can be good medicine when it is used correctly." Elijah took stock of his situation with the practical assessment of a man who had spent his life navigating dangerous circumstances. He was alive, which was more than he had expected when Silas Harker's blade had opened his arm. He was in an Apache camp, surrounded by people who had every reason to view him as an enemy, and he was utterly dependent on the goodwill of a woman he had saved from a fire 3 years ago, a woman who was now repaying that debt with a devotion that both humbled and unsettled him. "Where are my things?" he asked. "My gun, my saddlebags?" "Safe," Ayanna assured him. "My father has placed them under his protection. No one will touch them without his permission, and his permission will not be given." "Your father, the chief?" "Yes. His name is Tarak. It means star. He was named for the star that appeared in the sky on the night of his birth, a sign that he would lead our people through times of darkness." She handed him a clay cup filled with water, and he drank gratefully, the cool liquid soothing his parched throat. "He wishes to meet you when you are strong enough. He has questions about the man who saved his daughter." The prospect of meeting an Apache chief filled Elijah with a mixture of apprehension and curiosity. He had encountered Apache warriors before, usually at a distance and usually under circumstances that involved gunfire and bloodshed. The idea of sitting down to speak with one of their leaders, as a guest rather than an enemy, was entirely outside his experience. "What should I expect?" he asked. "I don't know your customs, don't want to give offense." Ayanna's expression softened with something that might have been approval. "Most white men do not ask such questions. They assume their ways are the only ways. and they blunder through our world like blind horses, trampling everything they do not understand. I've been the stranger in plenty of places, Elijah replied. Learned early that listening is worth more than talking when you're in unfamiliar territory. Then you have already learned the most important lesson. She rose to her feet with the fluid grace that seemed to characterize all her movements. Rest now, eat when food is brought to you, build your strength. Tomorrow, if you are able, I will take you to meet my father. She moved toward the entrance of the wickiup, her silhouette framed against the bright morning light. At the threshold, she paused and looked back at him, her dark eyes holding depths he could not fathom. Thank you, she said quietly, for asking, for caring about doing things properly. It means more than you know. Then she was gone, leaving Elijah alone with his thoughts and the distant sounds of camp life filtering through the walls. The day passed slowly, marked by the movement of shadows across the wickiup walls and the comings and goings of various tribal members who found reasons to peer inside at the wounded stranger. Some brought food, simple dishes of roasted meat and ground corn that Elijah ate with genuine gratitude. Others simply looked, their expressions ranging from open hostility to guarded curiosity before moving on without a word. He understood their suspicion. In their place, he would have felt the same. By evening, he was strong enough to stand, though his legs trembled with the effort, and he had to grip the wooden frame of the wickiup to keep from falling. The wound in his arm had closed cleanly, the angry red streaks of infection fading to a healthier pink that promised eventual healing. The medicine woman visited once more, examining her work with critical eyes before nodding in apparent satisfaction and departing without speaking a single word to him directly. She does not speak to outsiders, Ayanna explained when she returned to check on him. It is not personal. She believes that words carry power, and she must be careful where she spends that power. Makes sense, Elijah said, lowering himself carefully back onto the furs. Words can do more damage than bullets sometimes. Ayanna studied him with renewed interest. You speak like a man who has been wounded by words. Haven't we all? He deflected the question with a shrug that pulled at his healing arm and made him wince. Tell me about tomorrow. What happens when I meet your father? She settled onto the mat across from him, her legs folded beneath her in a position that looked comfortable despite its complexity. The firelight caught the planes of her face, emphasizing the strength in her jaw and the intelligence in her eyes. She was beautiful, Elijah realized, not in the soft, delicate way of the women he had known in towns and settlements, but in the fierce, unyielding way of the land itself. My father will ask you questions, she said, about your life, your family, your purpose in traveling through our territory. He will want to understand who you are, not just what you have done. And if he doesn't like my answers, then you will remain our guest until he decides otherwise, but I do not think you need to worry. She paused, choosing her next words carefully. I have told him about Broken Mesa, about what you did for me. He understands the weight of such a debt. There is no debt, Elijah said firmly. I did what anyone would have done. No. Her voice carried a sharp edge that surprised him. You did what no one else was willing to do. The other men at that trading post, they saw a burning building and an Apache child, and they calculated that the risk was not worth the reward. They would not have risked their lives for one of their own children. But you did not calculate. You simply acted. She leaned forward, her eyes holding his with an intensity that made his breath catch. That is why my father will listen to you. That is why the medicine woman agreed to treat your wounds. Not because I asked, but because your actions 3 summers ago revealed the truth of your character. Among my people, we believe that a man shows who he truly is in moments of crisis. When there is no time to think, only time to act, the truth emerges. Elijah absorbed her words in silence, uncomfortable with the weight of meaning she was placing on what had felt in the moment like simple instinct. He had not been thinking about honor or character when he ran into that burning building. He had been thinking about a mother's screams and a child's terrified eyes, and the knowledge that he could not live with himself if he walked away. What about you? He asked, steering the conversation away from himself. What truth did that moment reveal about you? A shadow crossed her face, there and gone so quickly he might have imagined it. It revealed that I was not as brave as I believed myself to be. I froze when the fire surrounded me. I could not move, could not think, could only watch the flames come closer and wait for death. She looked away, her jaw tightening. You gave me a second chance to discover my courage. I have spent the last 3 summers trying to become worthy of that gift. And have you? Found your courage, I mean. She met his gaze again, and this time there was something fierce and proud in her expression. I killed a mountain lion with my bare hands last winter when it attacked our horse herd. I have ridden alone through territories where no woman of my tribe has traveled in generations. And tonight, I saved a man's life while an outlaw with a machete stood ready to take my own. A small smile touched her lips. Yes, I believe I have found my courage. Before Elijah could respond, a commotion outside the wickiup drew their attention. Voices were raised in what sounded like heated argument, and Ayana's expression shifted from pride to concern in an instant. She rose swiftly and moved to the entrance, listening to the rapid exchange of Apache words with growing tension in her posture. What is it? Elijah asked, pushing himself upright despite the protest of his injured arm. Scouts have returned from the southern pass, she said without turning around. They bring news of riders approaching our territory, white men heavily armed following a trail. A cold weight settled in Elijah's stomach. How many riders? 6, perhaps 7. And one of them? She turned to face him, and he saw fear in her eyes for the first time since she had appeared out of the twilight to save his life. One of them has a wounded arm, wrapped in bloody bandages. Silas Harker. The outlaw had not fled into the night and vanished as Elijah had hoped. He had found reinforcements and come looking for the man who had escaped him and the woman who had denied him his kill. And now that hunt was leading him directly to the Apache camp where Elijah lay healing. This is my fault, Elijah said grimly. I've brought danger to your people. No, Ayana replied, her fear hardening into determination. Silas Harker has brought danger, and together we will make him regret that decision. The meeting with Chief Tarak happened sooner than planned, not in the formal setting Ayana had described, but in a hastily convened war council where Elijah found himself surrounded by Apache warriors who regarded him with barely concealed hostility. The chief sat at the center of the gathering, a man whose age showed in the silver threading through his hair, but whose eyes held the sharp clarity of someone who had survived decades of conflict and hardship. Tarak was smaller than Elijah had expected, lean and compact where his warriors were tall and muscular, but there was an authority in his bearing that made physical size irrelevant. When he spoke, everyone listened. When he moved, everyone watched. This was a man who led not through force, but through the accumulated wisdom of a lifetime spent navigating impossible choices. My daughter tells me you are a man of honor, Tarak said, his English surprisingly clear though heavily accented. She says you walked through fire to save her life when others would have let her burn. I did what needed doing, Elijah replied, keeping his voice steady despite the weight of dozens of hostile eyes upon him. Any man worth the name would have done the same. Any man worth the name, Tarak repeated, a ghost of a smile touching his weathered lips. And yet no other man did. Only you. He leaned forward, studying Elijah with an intensity that seemed to pierce through flesh and bone to whatever lay beneath. Now you bring enemies to our doorstep. Explain. Elijah told the story simply and directly, without embellishment or excuse. He described the cattle money he had been carrying, the ambush in the desert, the fight that had left him wounded and 2 outlaws dead. He explained Silas Harker's escape and Ayana's intervention, her decision to bring him to the Apache camp for healing. Throughout his account, he made no attempt to minimize his own role in bringing danger to their people. The fault is mine, he concluded. Harker followed my trail, and that trail led him here. If you want me gone, I'll ride out tonight and draw him away from your camp. In your condition, you would not make it a mile before falling from your horse, Tarak observed. And even if you could ride, Harker has already found our location. Your departure would change nothing except to deliver you into his hands. The chief exchanged glances with several of his warriors, communication passing between them in looks and subtle gestures. "No, you will stay, and we will deal with these intruders together." A murmur of dissent rippled through the gathered warriors. One of them, a tall man with scars crossing his face like a map of past battles, stepped forward and spoke rapidly in Apache, his tone clearly challenging. Tarek listened without interruption, then responded in the same language, his voice carrying an edge of steel that silenced further objection. "Karuk believes we should give you to Harker," Ayana translated quietly from her position at Elijah's side. "He says one white man's life is not worth risking our people. My father has reminded him that honor is not measured by convenience, and that a debt unpaid weighs on the spirit of the entire tribe." The warrior called Karuk shot a venomous glare in Elijah's direction but did not speak again. Whatever authority Tarek commanded, it was enough to override even strong dissent among his people. "How many warriors can you field?" Elijah asked, his mind already turning to tactical considerations. "And what kind of weapons?" Tarek's eyes narrowed slightly, as if reassessing the wounded cowboy before him. "You speak like a man who has fought before, not just survived fights, but planned them." "I rode with the cavalry for 3 years before I went into ranching," Elijah admitted. "Saw action against Comanche raiding parties, Mexican bandits, and a few outlaw gangs that thought the frontier was beyond the law's reach." He met the chief's gaze directly. "I know how men like Harker think. They're expecting to ride in here and find a camp full of women and children, easy pickings for armed men on horseback. They're not expecting organized resistance." "And you would help us organize such resistance?" Tarek's voice carried a note of genuine curiosity. "You would fight against men of your own kind?" "Silas Harker isn't my kind," Elijah said flatly. "He's a murderer and a thief who tried to kill me for money I earned through honest labor. The color of his skin doesn't make him my brother any more than the color of yours makes you my enemy." A long silence followed his words, broken only by the crackling of the central fire and the distant sounds of the camp continuing its nightly routines. Elijah held Tarek's gaze without flinching, aware that he was being judged by standards he did not fully understand, measured against criteria that had been developed over generations of dealing with people who often proved unworthy of trust. Finally, Tarek nodded slowly. "Very well. You will help us prepare our defense. Karuk will assign warriors to work with you." He glanced at the scarred warrior, who looked as though he had swallowed something bitter but nodded in reluctant acceptance. "And my daughter will remain at your side to translate and to ensure that no misunderstandings arise." "Father," Ayana began, a note of protest in her voice. "This is not a request," Tarek interrupted gently but firmly. "You brought this man among us. You vouched for his honor with your own. Now you will see this through to its conclusion, whatever that may be." Ayana bowed her head in acceptance, though Elijah could see the conflict in her expression. She had saved his life and brought him to her people for healing, but she had not anticipated that her act of mercy would thrust her into the middle of a coming battle. As the council dispersed and warriors began preparing for the confrontation ahead, Elijah found himself standing beside Ayana in the cool night air, looking up at stars that seemed close enough to touch. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, "for all of this. You saved my life, and I've repaid you by putting your people in danger." "You have repaid nothing yet," she replied, her voice carrying unexpected warmth. "But before this is over, I believe you will have the chance to balance many debts." The hours before dawn were spent in preparation that transformed the Apache camp from a peaceful settlement into a fortress of strategic intent. Elijah worked alongside Karuk and a dozen other warriors, his injured arm protesting every movement, but his mind sharp with the focused clarity that always came to him before battle. They established defensive positions using the natural terrain, identifying choke points where mounted attackers would be forced to slow down and exposed positions where hidden archers could rain death upon anyone foolish enough to enter the kill zone. Karuk said little during their work together, communicating through gestures and occasional grunts that needed no translation. But as the night wore on and their preparations took shape, Elijah noticed a gradual shift in the warriors' demeanor. The open hostility faded into something closer to grudging respect, The kind of acknowledgement that one fighting man gives another when competence has been demonstrated beyond doubt. "You have done this before," Karuk said finally, his English rough but comprehensible. "Set traps for enemies, planned killing grounds." "More times than I care to remember," Elijah admitted. "It's not something I'm proud of, but it's kept me alive." "Pride is for peacetime," Karuk replied. "In war, only survival matters." He paused, studying Elijah with eyes that had clearly witnessed horrors beyond counting. "When this is over, if we both still breathe, perhaps we will share stories. I think you have seen things that would give most men nightmares." "I think we both have," Elijah said. And something passed between them in that moment, a recognition that transcended the boundaries of culture and conflict. They were both survivors, both men who had walked through darkness and emerged scarred but unbroken. That shared experience created a bond that no amount of historical enmity could entirely erase. As the eastern sky began to lighten with the first hints of approaching dawn, Ayanna found Elijah checking the action on his recovered revolver. She carried a bow across her back and a knife at her hip, her earlier hesitation replaced by the same fierce determination he had seen when she first appeared to save his life in the desert. "The scouts report that Harker's men have made camp 3 miles south," she said. "They will wait for full light before approaching. They are cautious, which means they are not fools." "Caution won't save them if they ride into our prepared ground," Elijah replied. "But it might make them unpredictable. Smart enemies are always more dangerous than stupid ones. My father has ordered the women and children moved to the hidden canyon behind the northern ridge. Whatever happens here, they will be safe." She hesitated, then added, "He offered me the chance to go with them, to protect them if the worst should happen. But you refused." "I refused." Her chin lifted with defiant pride. "I did not save your life only to hide while others fight to defend it. Whatever comes, we face it together." Elijah wanted to argue, wanted to insist that she remove herself from danger, but he recognized the futility of such arguments before they left his mouth. Ayanna was not a woman who could be protected against her will, any more than the desert could be convinced to stop being harsh or the sun persuaded not to rise. She was who she was, and that fierce independence was part of what made her remarkable. "Then stay close to me," he said instead, "and when the shooting starts, find cover before you find targets. Dead heroes don't win battles." A ghost of a smile crossed her face. Wise advice from a man who ran into a burning building without hesitation. That was different. There wasn't time to think. "Perhaps that is when the truest wisdom emerges," she replied, "when there is no time for doubt to poison courage." They took their positions as the sun crested the eastern mountains, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson that seemed almost too beautiful for a day that would likely end in bloodshed. Elijah crouched behind a natural rock formation that provided both cover and a clear line of sight toward the southern approach. His revolver loaded and ready, his injured arm strapped close to his body to prevent it from hindering his movements. Ayanna positioned herself 10 feet to his left, her bow strung and an arrow nocked, her breathing slow and controlled in the manner of someone who had trained extensively for exactly this kind of moment. The other warriors were scattered throughout the surrounding terrain, invisible among the rocks and scrub brush, waiting with the patient stillness of predators who knew their prey would eventually come to them. The wait was the hardest part. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours, the silence broken only by the whisper of wind through the canyon and the distant call of birds who remained oblivious to the violence about to erupt beneath them. Elijah found his thoughts drifting to the life he had been building before Harker's ambush, the small ranch he had dreamed of purchasing, the quiet existence he had imagined for himself after years of wandering and fighting. Strange, he reflected, how quickly priorities could shift. 3 days ago, that ranch had represented everything he wanted from life. Now, crouching in an Apache camp beside a woman who had saved him from certain death, he found himself questioning whether that solitary dream had ever truly been enough. "Movement," Ayanna whispered, her keen eyes catching something Elijah's had missed. "Southern Ridge, 7 riders, just as the scouts reported." Elijah raised his head carefully, peering over the rock formation toward the approaching threat. He could see them now, dark shapes against the brightening sky, moving with the confident swagger of men who expected easy prey. Silas Harker rode at the front, his wounded arm visible even at this distance, wrapped in bandages that had turned brown with dried blood. "He brought friends," Elijah muttered grimly. "Local muscle, probably. Men who'll kill for money and not ask too many questions." "They will find their questions answered soon enough," Ayanna replied, her voice cold with anticipation. "Let them come. Let them see what happens to those who threaten the people of Tarak." The riders drew closer, and the trap prepared to spring shut around them. The first arrow flew before Harker's men had even realized they were riding into a trap. It struck the rider at the rear of the group, piercing his throat with such force that he tumbled from his saddle without making a sound. By the time his body hit the ground, 3 more arrows were already in the air, launched from positions so well concealed that the attackers could not identify their sources. Chaos erupted among the riders as horses screamed and men shouted conflicting orders. A second outlaw fell with an arrow through his chest, his dying hands clawing uselessly at the shaft that had stolen his life. The remaining 5 scattered, abandoning their confident formation in favor of desperate self-preservation, but the terrain worked against them. The same natural features that made this location ideal for a camp also made it a killing ground for anyone caught in the open. Elijah sighted down the barrel of his revolver and squeezed the trigger, his shot taking a fleeing rider in the shoulder and sending him spinning from his horse. The man hit the ground hard and did not move, either dead or too stunned to rise. 5 shots remained in his cylinder, and Elijah knew he would have to make each one count. Silas Harker, to his credit, reacted faster than his companions. Instead of fleeing blindly, he threw himself from his horse and rolled behind a cluster of boulders, using the natural cover to shield himself from the arrows that continued to rain down around him. His voice cut through the chaos, barking orders that slowly restored some semblance of organization among his surviving men. "They're in the rocks," Harker shouted. "Spread out and find cover. Return fire." The outlaws began shooting toward any position that might conceal an enemy, their bullets chipping stone and kicking up dust but finding no flesh. The Apache warriors were too skilled at concealment, too experienced at fighting from hidden positions against enemies who relied on numbers and firepower. Each time an outlaw exposed himself to take a shot, an arrow would fly from an unexpected direction, forcing him back into cover or adding another wound to his tally. But Harker was adapting, learning, reading the pattern of the ambush with the cunning of a man who had survived countless violent encounters. He gathered his remaining men behind a natural rock formation that provided protection from multiple angles, creating a defensive position that would be costly to assault directly. "We can't wait them out," Ayanna said urgently, reading the tactical situation with the same clarity as Elijah. "If they dig in and hold until nightfall, they might slip away in the darkness." "Then we don't let them dig in," Elijah replied. He turned to where Karuk had positioned himself behind a nearby outcropping. "Can you pin them down while I work around to their flank?" Karuk's scarred face twisted into something that might have been a grin. "You would trust me to cover you? A white man trusting an Apache with his life." "You're the best archer I've seen since I left Texas," Elijah said simply, "and right now, that matters more than anything else." Something shifted in Karuk's expression, hostility finally giving way to genuine respect. He nodded once, sharply, and began signaling to the other warriors in a series of hand gestures that communicated complex tactical instructions without a single spoken word. Elijah moved before he could second-guess himself, leaving the safety of his cover and circling wide through a shallow gully that concealed his approach from the outlaw's position. His injured arm throbbed with every step, but he pushed the pain aside, focusing entirely on the task at hand. The sounds of battle continued behind him, arrows flying and guns barking, as Karuk and the other warriors kept Harker's men occupied with sustained pressure. He emerged from the gully behind a massive boulder that sat less than 20 feet from where Harker had established his defensive position. From here, he could see the outlaw leader clearly, his face twisted with rage and frustration as he tried to coordinate his dwindling forces. 3 of his men were down, leaving only himself and 2 others still capable of fighting. "Give it up, Harker," Elijah shouted, his revolver trained on the outlaw's center mass. "Your men are dead or dying. Ride out now, and you might live to see another sunset." Harker's head snapped toward the sound of Elijah's voice, and the hatred in his eyes burned with an intensity that made the desert sun seem cold by comparison. "Cole, should have known you'd survive. You're like a cockroach that won't stay stepped on." "Last chance," Elijah said, his finger tightening on the trigger. "Drop your weapons and ride out. I won't ask again." For a moment, he thought Harker might actually surrender. The outlaw's shoulders slumped slightly, and his gun hand began to lower toward the ground. But then his eyes flicked to something behind Elijah, and a cruel smile spread across his weathered face. Elijah spun just as the shot rang out, feeling the bullet tear through the air inches from his head. One of Harker's men had circled around during the confrontation, flanking the flanker, and now stood with his pistol raised for a second shot that would not miss. The arrow took the outlaw through the eye before he could fire again. He dropped like a puppet with cut strings, dead before his body finished falling. Ayanna emerged from concealment, already knocking another arrow, her face set in lines of fierce concentration. But her intervention had cost precious seconds, and Harker used them well. He lunged from his cover, crossing the distance between himself and Elijah with surprising speed, his wounded arm seemingly forgotten in the rush of combat fury. They collided with bone-jarring force, both men's weapons flying from their grasps as they crashed to the ground in a tangle of limbs. Harker's hands found Elijah's throat, squeezing with manic strength. "Should have killed you proper the first time," the outlaw snarled, his face inches away, his breath hot and foul. "Won't make that mistake twice." Black spots began to dance at the edges of Elijah's vision as the pressure on his windpipe increased. His injured arm was useless, pinned beneath Harker's knee. His other hand scrabbled desperately at the ground, searching for anything that might serve as a weapon. His fingers closed around a rock, jagged and heavy, and he swung it with all the strength remaining in his body. The rock connected with Harker's temple with a sickening crunch that Elijah felt through his entire arm. The outlaw's grip on his throat loosened instantly, his eyes rolling back as he slumped sideways, blood streaming from the wound above his ear. Elijah gasped for air, his lungs burning as oxygen flooded back into his starved body, his vision slowly clearing as the black spots receded. He rolled away from Harker's fallen form, coughing and wheezing, his throat feeling as though it had been crushed in a vice. For a moment he simply lay there on the hard ground, staring up at the impossibly blue Arizona sky and marveling at the simple fact that he was still alive. Then Ayanna was beside him, her hands gentle on his face, her eyes scanning him for injuries with desperate intensity. "Elijah," she said, his name carrying more emotion than he had ever heard from her before. "Can you breathe? Are you hurt?" "Been better," he managed, his voice coming out as a rough croak. "Been worse too. Harker?" They both looked toward the fallen outlaw. Harker lay motionless where he had dropped, blood pooling beneath his head, his chest rising and falling with shallow breaths that suggested life but not consciousness. The rock that had felled him lay nearby, stained dark with evidence of the violence it had inflicted. "He lives," Ayanna observed, her tone suggesting this was not entirely welcome news. For now. Around them, the sounds of battle had faded into silence. Karuk emerged from his position, surveying the aftermath with the clinical detachment of a warrior assessing a completed engagement. The other Apache fighters appeared one by one, checking the fallen outlaws and confirming what Elijah already knew. Harker's men were finished, either dead or too wounded to pose any further threat. "It is done," Karuk announced, approaching Elijah and Ayanna with something that might have been approval in his scarred features. "The enemy is defeated. Our people are safe." Elijah pushed himself into a sitting position, wincing as the movement reminded him of every injury he had accumulated over the past few days. "What about the one I shot, and the last man Harker had with him?" "Both dead," Karuk replied. "The one you wounded did not survive his fall from the horse. The other tried to flee when he saw you fighting Harker. He did not get far." The warrior's hand rested briefly on the knife at his hip, and nothing more needed to be said. Chief Tarek arrived as the sun climbed toward its zenith, having descended from the elevated position where he had observed the entire battle. His eyes swept across the scene, taking in the fallen enemies, the victorious warriors, and the wounded cowboy who sat in the dust beside his daughter. Whatever he saw seemed to satisfy him, because when he spoke, his voice carried warmth that had been absent during their first meeting. "You fought well," Tarek said, addressing Elijah directly. "You risked your life for people who are not your own, against men who were. This is not a small thing." "They stopped being my people the moment they decided murder was an acceptable way to make a living," Elijah replied, his voice still rough from Harker's strangling grip. "Blood doesn't make family. Actions do." Tarek nodded slowly, as if this answer confirmed something he had already suspected. "My daughter chose wisely when she saved your life. The debt she owed has been repaid many times over through your actions today." He paused, exchanging a glance with Ayanna that communicated volumes in a single look. "You are welcome among our people for as long as you wish to stay." The offer stunned Elijah into momentary silence. He had expected gratitude, perhaps even respect, but not acceptance, not welcome. The Apache had every reason to view all white men with suspicion and hostility, given the treatment they had received at the hands of settlers, soldiers, and the government that claimed to represent civilization. For their chief to extend such an invitation spoke to something profound, a recognition that transcended the usual boundaries of conflict and distrust. "I'm honored," Elijah said carefully. "Truly. But I'm not sure I belong here. This is your land, your people, your way of life. I'm just a cowboy who got lucky." "Luck," Tarek repeated, a hint of amusement entering his weathered features. "Is that what you call running into a burning building to save a child you had never met? Is that what you call standing against armed enemies to protect strangers who had every reason to turn you away?" He shook his head slowly. "What you call luck, we call character. And character is not bound by the color of skin or the language of birth." Ayanna moved closer to Elijah, her hand coming to rest on his shoulder with a familiarity that felt both new and ancient at the same time. "My father speaks truth. You have proven yourself through actions, not words. Among our people, that is the only proof that matters." The warriors who had fought beside him began to gather, their earlier hostility replaced by the camaraderie that develops between men who have faced death together and emerged victorious. Karuk approached and extended his hand in the manner of the white men, a gesture of respect that bridged the gap between their two worlds. "You fight well for a man with one working arm," the scarred warrior said, something that might have been a smile flickering across his stern features. "When you are healed, perhaps you will teach me how you shoot so accurately with that pistol of yours." "Only if you teach me how your people move through terrain without making a sound," Elijah replied, clasping Karuk's forearm in a grip that sealed their unexpected friendship. As the Apache began the work of tending to their wounded and dealing with the fallen enemies, Elijah found himself standing beside Ayanna at the edge of the battlefield, looking out over the desert that had nearly claimed his life and had instead given him something he had not known he was missing: purpose, connection, a sense of belonging that went beyond the solitary dreams of ranch ownership and quiet retirement. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. "Now," Ayanna replied, her hand finding his and squeezing gently, "we discover what the future holds for a cowboy who walked through fire and an Apache woman who learned to do the same." 6 months had passed since the battle that had transformed Elijah Cole from a wounded stranger into a man with a place in the world. The seasons had turned, carrying away the brutal heat of summer and replacing it with the crisp clarity of autumn that painted the Arizona mountains in shades of gold and amber. The Apache camp had moved twice during that time, following the ancient rhythms of migration that had sustained the tribe for generations, and Elijah had moved with them. Silas Harker had survived his wounds, though he would never be the same man who had ridden into the canyon expecting easy prey. The territorial authorities had been summoned to collect him, and the one other outlaw who had lived through the ambush, and both now awaited trial in Tucson for crimes that would likely see them hanged before winter. Elijah had given his testimony to the marshal who came to take custody of the prisoners, recounting the ambush, the attempted murder, and the final confrontation with clinical precision. When asked how he had ended up in an Apache camp, he had simply said that he had found friends in unexpected places. The marshal had not pressed for details. The cattle money that had nearly cost Elijah his life remained in his saddlebags, untouched since the day Ayanna had recovered it from the desert. He had offered it to Tarak as compensation for the tribe's assistance, but the chief had refused with a gentle smile. Debts of honor, he explained, could not be paid with currency. They could only be balanced through actions that demonstrated the worth of the person who owed them. So Elijah had stayed, learning the ways of the Apache people with the same dedication he had once applied to mastering the skills of ranching and survival. He learned to track game through terrain that seemed to hold no traces of passage, to move silently through brush that should have betrayed every footstep, to read the language of the land in ways that went far beyond anything he had known before. In return, he shared his own knowledge, teaching the warriors marksmanship techniques that improved their accuracy with the rifles they had acquired through trade, showing them maintenance skills that extended the life of their weapons and equipment. But it was with Ayanna that the deepest learning occurred. Their connection, forged in fire 3 years ago and tempered through shared danger, had grown into something neither of them had words to adequately describe. They spent hours together each day, sometimes working side by side on tasks that required cooperation, sometimes simply sitting in comfortable silence as the sun traced its arc across the endless sky. She taught him her language, laughing at his early attempts at pronunciation, praising his progress when the strange sounds began to flow more naturally from his tongue. He taught her to read and write in English, opening doors to a world of literature and knowledge that had previously been closed to her. The morning of the first frost found them standing together on a ridge overlooking the valley where the tribe had made its autumn camp. Below, the wickiups sent threads of smoke spiraling into the crystalline air, and the sounds of daily life drifted up to them on the gentle breeze. Children played while women worked, and warriors prepared for the hunting parties that would stock provisions for the coming winter. "You could still leave," Ayanna said, breaking a contemplative silence that had stretched comfortably between them. "Take your money, buy that ranch you dreamed about, build the life you planned before Harker interrupted it." Elijah considered her words, turning them over in his mind, as he had turned them over countless times during the months since the battle. The dream of a small ranch, a quiet life, a solitary existence free from the complications of human connection. It had seemed so appealing once, so perfectly suited to a man who had spent years wandering without roots or purpose. "That dream belonged to someone else," he said finally. "A man who thought being alone was the same as being free. I know better now." He turned to face her, this woman who had saved his life twice over, first by pulling him from the jaws of death in the desert, and then by showing him that survival meant nothing without something worth surviving for. "That dream belonged to someone else," he said finally. "A man who thought being alone was the same as being free. I know better now." He turned to face her, this woman who had saved his life twice over, first by pulling him from the jaws of death in the desert, and then by showing him that survival meant nothing without something worth surviving for. Her dark eyes held depths he was only beginning to explore, mysteries that would take a lifetime to understand. He found himself hoping he would have that lifetime. "I spoke with your father yesterday," Elijah continued, watching her expression carefully. "Told him my intentions, asked for his blessing." Something flickered in Ayanna's eyes, hope and fear intermingled in equal measure. "And what did he say?" "He said that a man who walks through fire for strangers will surely walk through anything for the woman he loves. He said that courage like mine deserves to be matched with courage like yours." Elijah reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple band of silver. "I'm asking the woman who taught me what bravery really means to spend her life teaching me everything else I don't know yet." He held the ring out to her, his heart pounding harder than it had during any gunfight or ambush. "I'm asking you to let me try to be worthy of you, even though I know I never fully will be." She took the ring from his wife. "I'm asking the woman who taught me what bravery really means to spend her life teaching me everything else I don't know yet." He held the ring out to her, his heart pounding harder than it had during any gunfight or ambush. I'm asking you to let me try to be worthy of you, even though I know I never fully will be." She took the ring from his palm, turning it so the morning light caught its simple surface. Then she slipped it onto her finger, where it fit as though it had been made for her, because it had been. "Yes," she said simply. Below them, the camp continued its daily rhythms, unaware that something momentous had just occurred on the ridge above. But that was fitting, Elijah thought, as he pulled Ayanna into his arms. The greatest changes often happened quietly, in moments that seemed ordinary, until you realized they had altered everything. The cowboy who had once saved a girl from fire had found his home at last. And the Apache woman who had repaid her debt had discovered that some debts were the ridge toward their future, the rising sun warm on their backs, and the promise of a shared life stretching endlessly before them.